Loner Rancher was waiting for a bride, but 7 abandoned children showed up instead. He had dust on his boots, a coffee cup stained with years of silence, and a porch swing that hadn't moved since the wind gave up on his land. Jeremiah Holt was the kind of man the world passed by without waving. Out in the open flat of Montana's edge, where the soil cracked like old skin and coyotes cried instead of children, he lived alone, tending to cattle, welding fences, and waiting for what even he wasn't sure anymore. Before we begin this journey, subscribe, because not every door opens to who you expect. And sometimes the people we were never waiting for are exactly the ones who change us most. So if you're the kind of person who still believes in kindness, connection, and healing that doesn't come with a punchline, please consider subscribing. Now let's begin. But once, not so long ago, he'd sent a letter. Just one, folded in perfect thirds, sealed with his calloused thumbprint. It was addressed to a mail-order bride service his mother had circled in the corner of an old magazine before she passed. He didn't expect an answer, but he waited anyway. Built a second bed frame, hung a mirror, fixed a barn roof. Then on a Thursday morning, with the sun barely touching the peaks, a rickety van pulled up his long gravel road. He thought it was her. He opened the door with a small, hopeful smile tucked in the corner of his mouth like a forgotten coin. But it wasn't her. It was 7 children, all of them different ages, different faces, but with the same hollow gaze, the kind that belongs to those who waited too long to be wanted. Their shoes were mismatched. One held a teddy bear with no eyes. Another clutched a plastic bag of broken crayons. No one spoke. The driver, a man who didn't bother to step out, handed Jeremiah a crumpled note and peeled off before dust settled. The note read, "She said you're kind. She said they'd be safe here. I have nothing else to give." There was no name, just a lipstick smear in the corner. Jeremiah stood frozen for a long time. The children stood stiller. Then the smallest one sneezed, and that broke it. He didn't speak either, just opened the door wider and motioned them in. The house wasn't ready for noise, or shoes, or cereal spills. It creaked under the weight of newness, like it didn't trust what was happening. The second bed frame, built with quiet hope, became a jungle gym. The porch swing moved again. Someone drew on the walls. Jeremiah watched them like they were ghosts made solid. He made eggs that no one wanted and coffee too bitter for their tongues. He bandaged knees, found toys in the sink, bought more pillows. Still, no one explained where they came from, or why. The oldest, a girl with braids too tight and eyes too old, began folding clothes without being asked. The boy, who never spoke, began sleeping by the window. Jeremiah found a drawing taped to his fridge one morning, a picture of a man and 7 small stick figures, all holding hands. Days turned into weeks. The bride never came. But the mail brought other things, school letters, medical forms, court documents that made his name official next to theirs. He hadn't planned for any of it, but he remembered what it felt like to be chosen for nothing. So he chose them. Each Sunday, he set a table for 8. Sometimes they sat in silence. Other times, they laughed so loud the barn swallows sang back. Winter came, and with it, new routines. Scarves hung like prayers near the door. Boots lined up like promises. And Jeremiah learned to braid hair. Badly, but lovingly. He found a broken piano in town, and the kids spent hours coaxing music out of it. The smallest boy sang off-key lullabies to the cows. The oldest started writing poetry in the margins of school books. Jeremiah bought a camcorder at a garage sale and filmed birthdays, first snowfalls, a tooth falling out. He played the tapes back at night, stunned at the miracle of noise and movement and belonging. But one evening, as he sifted through old mail, he found another letter, unopened, postmarked 3 months before. The return address was from a hospital 2 states over. His hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a short note. "If they make it to you, please forgive me. My lungs are done fighting. Tell them I tried to wait. Tell them I love them." It was signed Marigold, and below that, a list of 7 names. Each child, each one he'd been learning to love. Jeremiah sat on the porch, the letter pressed to his chest. He remembered the lipstick smear, He remembered the voice on the line the day he first called the service. She had laughed when he said he lived on a ranch alone. She said she had always wanted to raise kids around horses. He had laughed too. He never got her last name. He never thought it mattered. But she had sent them to him, not because he was ready, but because he was the last good place she could imagine. The next morning, he built a frame for her letter, hung it next to the fridge. When the children asked who it was from, he said, "Someone who made sure you'd always have a home." That night, the wind howled through the cracks, but the house stayed warm. Spring arrived, so did small victories. The silent boys started humming while feeding the chickens. The girl with braids let them loosen. The one who clung to the teddy bear began sewing him new eyes. And Jeremiah, he planted flowers. He didn't know their names, but they reminded him of Marigold. Then one morning, the oldest brought home a form from school. Father's Day picnic. 1 adult per student. He didn't hesitate. Packed sandwiches. Found an old baseball glove. Wore his cleanest flannel. When they arrived, other parents stared. But the kids ran into the field like he was the only one who mattered. He stood in the sun, surrounded by 7 shades of joy, and thought maybe this was what the bride had meant all along. But just as the day began to close, a woman stood at the edge of the field. Slim frame, weathered face, oxygen tube slung over her shoulder. Jeremiah froze. The kids ran past him. The girl didn't. She turned to him, eyes wide. "That's our mom." Subscribe, because sometimes the family you're waiting for isn't the one you imagined, but the one that knocks when the wind howls the loudest. The sun rose quietly over the ranch that morning, painting long shadows over the porch where the letters still lay folded, stained with tears no one had seen fall. Silas hadn't moved from the rocking chair all night. The fire in the living room had long died, the coals cold, but the warmth inside him, kindled by the 7 children sleeping upstairs, remained stubbornly alive. He reread the letter one last time, then set it gently into the hearth, where it curled, smoked, and vanished. Whatever promise the bride had made, it was never meant to arrive, but something else had. Inside the house, the chaos of morning began to unfold. Bare feet thudded against the floors. Spoons clattered. Someone laughed, a high, clear sound Silas hadn't heard in years. He stood, cracked his back, and walked toward the kitchen. Breakfast wasn't elegant. Toast slightly burnt. Eggs overcooked. But it was theirs. The kids had learned to scramble and scurry like pups in a den. Eli, the oldest, had taken to flipping pancakes. June read instructions out loud from the back of a cereal box, pretending it was a recipe. Even little Sammy tried to help, holding up a fork like a trident and declaring he was on kitchen patrol. Silas didn't say much, but every morning he poured them orange juice and sat at the head of the table, nodding at each one like it was a roll call. The rituals grounded them, small acts of attention in a life too used to being ignored. He took them out to the stables later that day, let them touch the horses, feel the velvet of their noses, smell the hay and sweat. Some were scared at first, but curiosity overruled fear. Silas showed Eli how to brush down the mare, taught Daisy how to sit gentle in the saddle. Even shy little Max, with his downcast eyes, found courage to feed a sugar cube to the gelding. The ranch bloomed with life again. Toys lined the fence posts. Chalk drawings covered the barn door. Laughter bounced off the silos like wind through wheat. But beneath the surface, Silas could feel the cracks. They didn't speak of their past, didn't cry much, but at night he heard the whispered nightmares, the small whimpers, the haunted silences. One evening, while fixing a broken stair, he found a sketchbook tucked between the floorboards. Inside were drawings, painful, beautiful. A man with angry hands, a woman with eyes hollowed out, a child curled into herself. Then, as the pages turned, the scene softened. The angry man faded. The woman grew wings. And in the final drawing, 7 children stood around a bearded man wearing a cowboy hat, smiling beneath a vast sunrise. Silas knew then. The bride never came because she wasn't meant to. These children, they were weeks turned into months. Winter came, dusted the ranch in white. The kids built snowmen, made angels in the fields. Silas cut firewood while they warmed cider on the stove. On Christmas Eve, he found a gift wrapped in newspaper on his bed. Inside, a horseshoe painted gold and a note that read, "You saved us. We save you back." But not everything healed with time. Social services showed up in the new year. 2 cars. A woman in a long gray coat with a clipboard. She asked questions, took notes, spoke in careful tones. Silas stood straight, eyes calm, jaw firm. The children clung to door frames. She said the arrangement couldn't be permanent, that fostering required a license, that there were protocols, systems, background checks. Silas simply nodded, then asked her to stay for supper. That night, she sat at their table, watched Sammy offer his chair to Daisy, saw Eli cut meat for Max, watch Silas quietly refill everyone's cup. She asked no more questions. She left without saying when she'd return. The children didn't ask. They sensed the weight in Silas's steps. But they responded the only way they knew: extra hugs, tighter bedtime stories, longer prayers. 2 weeks passed. Then a letter came, not from the bride, not from the state, but from someone Silas hadn't seen in years. His sister, Lillian. She arrived on a Thursday morning, boots caked in snow, hair pulled tight, carrying a suitcase and an old photo album. She had heard, somehow, of what was happening, of the kids, of Silas, and she didn't come to judge. She came to help. Lillian had been a teacher once, good with books, better with broken children. She set up a chalkboard in the spare room, turned it into a school. She cooked in bulk. She taught them how to fold laundry with precision. She read to them by lantern light when storms took out the power. With Lillian's help, Silas applied for emergency guardianship. It took months, interviews, inspections, forms that felt endless. But he did it for them. One spring morning, a letter arrived bearing a gold seal. Approved. Silas was officially their guardian. The house erupted in celebration. Daisy made a cake, burnt on the edges, but covered in sprinkles. Max cried for the first time, but it wasn't fear, it was joy. Sammy danced in circles until he passed out on the couch. Silas sat outside that night, beneath a sky littered with stars, the warm weight of a blanket across his shoulders. Lillian joined him, handed him a mug of tea, and nodded. "You waited for a bride," she said, "and got a legacy." He didn't answer, just smiled into the night. Years passed. The children grew. One by one, they rode horses like pros, repaired fences, read poetry, learned to shoot straight, and love even straighter. They wrote letters to the people who had abandoned them, not out of bitterness, but closure. Eli left first, joined the fire department, sent postcards with smoke-stained fingers. June opened a bakery in town, named it Second Sunrise. The others followed, not out of need to escape, but because Silas had taught them how to stand on their own. And on the porch, beside the rocking chair, sat 7 golden horseshoes, one for each, anchored into it like stars etched into the earth. Silas never remarried, never needed to. He had found what he was waiting for, not in a veil or vows, but in a chorus of footsteps, in burnt toast and bedtime stories, in chalk-covered barns and snowman wars. Love didn't knock. It ran down the stairs in mismatched socks, asking what's for dinner. Before you go, subscribe, because the miracle you're waiting for might already be sitting at your table, just waiting to be seen.